What it is, folks, my name is Batman, and maybe I'm smoking too much of that Mary J, but I honestly have a hunch that the next Battlefield will be a sequel to Battlefield 2142, presumably titled 2143, and I'll lay out my thinking for you. Obviously, this is very speculative, hypothetical, but just hear me out, alright? Just hear me out, and you decide for yourself. Now, for starters, there is some basic precedent, because Battlefield 1942 had 1943. I'm not saying this is direct evidence of anything, but the point is, it wouldn't be entirely unprecedented, right? MW2 had MW3, so there's some precedent to suggest that Black Ops 2 will have Black Ops 3. That's just something to keep in mind. But the bigger thing you should take into account is that the FPS multiplayer genre as a whole is trending sci-fi right now. We saw this with Black Ops 2, we're seeing it with Ghosts and the Odin Strikes and Extinction Mode, Titanfall and Destiny are each heavy sci-fi titles and AAA titles that will give the rest of the genre stiff competition. Halo 5 is coming up, we know DICE's other big project right now is Star Wars Battlefront. And the PC FPS multiplayer community is already pretty heavily sci-fi as well. Things like PlanetSide 2, Blacklight Retribution. The next couple of years are going to be dominated by a science fiction theme. Just as the last couple of years were dominated by modern military shooters. And the years before that were dominated by World War II shooters. Because what's interesting to pay attention to is that the genre itself and every game it encompasses trends towards time periods, themes in unison. In the early 2000s, everything was World War II, right? You had several Medal of Honor games, several Battlefield games, Call of Duty 1, 2, and 3, and 5. But then, in the course of 2 to 3 years, starting roughly around 2007, everything suddenly switched to modern military shooters. The modern military shooter became the standard, and it has been the standard for a while now. And I know I'm feeling very tired of it at this point. I bet you a lot of other players are as well, especially if they've been playing since 2007. But the next question is, why do games have to sort of follow one another into the future? Why does the genre move as a whole, in unison? I think what it comes down to is that the future lets you implement gaming mechanisms that would seem silly in an earlier themed time period. With that in mind, games use a futuristic setting to implement said neat gaming mechanisms that would otherwise seem silly in a modern setting, and then other games have to follow suit because they too want to implement similar neat gaming mechanisms to compete with that other game without seeming silly also. Because what it always comes down to in the competition between FPS games is I can do this in that game and it's so cool, so why would I switch to this other game that doesn't have that feature? In Call of Duty, it's always been the kill streak rewards. Call of Duty has kill streaks and I really enjoy being rewarded for my hard work and slaying fucking noobs. And then getting to slay noobs even harder, lol. Why would I switch to Battlefield where I don't even get rewarded for slaying the fucking noobs? And that's why every FPS shooter has adopted a killstreak reward system, excluding Battlefield, and in fact, I would argue that Battlefield really wants to do it. You see them inching a little closer with this new squad perk streak reward system. But they haven't been able to, mainly because the Battlefield community is vehemently opposed to the idea, and I'm with them. Frankly, I think it would really disrupt vehicle gameplay, which is my favorite aspect of Battlefield, and of course the community also hates it because the Battlefield community has to suppress their gag reflex anytime they think of Battlefield copying Call of Duty. But I digress. The point is, COD had a streak reward system, and kids would say, I like kill streaks, these games don't have kill streaks, therefore I'm not playing these games. So, every other FPS shooter adopts the kill streak reward system. Crysis, Homefront, Halo, Medal of Honor, and now even Battlefield has a sort of streak reward system. Granted, it's as minor and as different from Call of Duty as it can be, but it's there, is the point. Another good example is the Battlefield skyscraper. Battlefield comes out and announces it's got this dope-ass motherfucking skyscraper that scrapes the floor like a beast when you collapse that shit. So suddenly all the children are saying, man, I can blow up a fucking building in Battlefield. Where's Call of Duty skyscraper? So of course 2 weeks later, Call of Duty announces it too has a collapsing skyscraper. What a fucking coincidence. But it doesn't show any gameplay for it or even any screenshots. They just said they had it. And it was only available in one playlist, and now that playlist is gone. So is the map. Bunch of false advertising bullshit, if you ask me. But what it says to me is that they just came up with the idea after Battlefield's skyscraper announcement and then shit it out in the last month of production, because they didn't show any gameplay of it either when they first announced it. So the point I'm trying to make is that competition in the free marketplace between similar products basically comes down to copying one another's best ideas and trying to do them a little better. For instance, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of that now infamous Apple versus Samsung case, or I think it was Samsung, Apple versus one of the smartphone guys, where Apple basically sued the new Samsung smartphone for having the same rectangular shape as Apple's iPhone. Now, why pour all that money and energy into a lawsuit over something as meaningless and trivial as the shape of a phone? Because Apple knew that Samsung's and all their competitors' primary strategy was to be as similar to the iPhone as possible. Because that's the best way to defeat the product on top, is to copy it ruthlessly and unapologetically. And Apple knew this, so they sought to stymie Samsung as much as possible. Apple wants their competitors' smartphones to be as different as possible from the iPhone, because that's the best way to maintain their marketplace dominance. And the same goes with FPS games. That's a big part of the reason that I think Battlefield has stuck with the modern military shooter theme for so long. It used to be DICE switch time periods with every new game they put out. Like for the first half of Battlefield's existence, the franchise's existence, every game that came out was in a different time period. But then with Bad Company 1, like, they start making the transition to consoles, right? That's where the money is. So for the first time, they have a single-player campaign. They cap the multiplayer at 32 players, and then they stick to the modern military shooter for the next 5 games. They stay in the same time period. So it's remarkable. Each of their first 5 games had a different time setting, and then their next 5 games have one time setting. And I can't help but think that that's because they were on consoles trying to compete for a majority of the console's market share, and the best way to do that was to be as similar as possible to the product that already does have a majority of the market share, and that game was Call of Duty, and Call of Duty was milking the modern military shooter theme. But now Call of Duty is obviously trending sci-fi, as is the rest of the genre, and now you have to look at the situation through the same context that we were looking at kill streaks and skyscrapers. What awesome features are these soon-to-be released AAA titles going to have that won't work in a modern military shooter setting? For instance, we know Titanfall is going to have that really intense player mobility, right? You're wall jumping and wall running and leaping from rooftops and shit. It's going to have Titans, obviously, and the Titans can do neat shit like stop bullets in their path, Matrix style, and then throw them back at the enemy. All of those things would be very, very silly and out of place in a modern military context, right? Those aren't current time period things. And I can picture it now. Kids are going to be saying things like, I just love the mobility in this game and other games don't have it. If I can't wall run, I ain't buying it, motherfucker. Oh yeah? That game looks neat, but it doesn't have motherfucking Titans, yo. So I bet you money Black Ops 3 has a Titan kill streak. Some sort of mech. And I also wouldn't be surprised if Battlefield went into the future so that it could have its own Titan as well. Something similar to what we saw with the Battle Walker in 2142. But they couldn't bring a Battle Walker type vehicle into a modern setting. You know, if they had Star Wars-esque like an AT-AT, AT-ST vehicles, which is what the Battle Walker reminded me of from 2142, if they had those walking around on, you know, Siege of Shanghai, that would be fucking awesome, but it wouldn't make sense, right? Because it's like, these are very futuristic vehicles. Why are they in this modern setting? So I suspect that they'll move into the future. Maybe they'll be able to incorporate their own supercharged steroids mobility capabilities, which would actually be pretty neat on Battlefield, maybe. And it won't just be Titanfall. Destiny is going to be providing the player all kinds of special abilities. I guarantee you the next Call of Duty is going to do some funky shit, like you can ride mechanical donkeys that shoot lasers with the cock. And the only way for Battlefield to keep up with and compete with all the new features that these other 3 AAA games are going to incorporate with their sci-fi capabilities, without seeming silly, is to go into the future and the sci-fi genre themselves. And again, it's just speculation, but what are you going to do, people? This is the future. Ride the wave, let the salt lick your wounds, and the cock grows in the warm embrace of Mother Nature. This is Batman, signing out.
Eat it!